My mother tried to swab my 3-month-old son's mouth in her own kitchen doorway, while 40 people ate cake in the next room. That's not the part that ended us. The part that ended us came back in an email. 11 days later, and it wasn't about my son at all. I'm 33. I'm a union electrician in Cleveland, been at it since I was 19, and I'm not a guy who makes scenes. Ask anybody. I'm the guy who moves the couch, who fixes the ceiling fan at your house a Saturday, who eats the dry turkey and says it's great. My wife Alina is 31. She's a dental hygienist. She's from Romania, came here with her parents when she was 12, and she has an accent that shows up mostly on the letter W, which is apparently the funniest thing on earth if you're my mother. My mother is Deb. She's 59. She works part-time at a dental supply company, which she would want you to know, and she has run the family calendar since before I could walk. My dad Ray is 62, retired out of a metal stamping plant in Bedford after 31 years, and he has exactly one setting when my mother starts in on somebody, which is to look at the floor and say, "Ah, that's just your mother. Write that line down. It comes up a lot. Our son Nico was born on January 9th. 7 pounds, 11 ounces, and a full head of black hair. Not baby fuzz. Actual hair, standing straight up like he'd been electrocuted. The nurse laughed and said she'd never seen so much on a newborn. Alina's mom cried. My sister Megan, who's 28, took about 100 pictures, and my mother stood at the foot of the bed, looked at my son for maybe 4 seconds, and said, out loud, in a room with 6 people in it, "Well, he sure didn't get that from us." A couple people laughed. My dad looked at the floor. Alina, who had been in labor for 26 hours, said nothing at all, and I told myself she was too tired to have caught it. She caught it. I need to back up, because if I start at the hospital, you're going to think this came out of nowhere. And it didn't. It never does. It came out of 3 years of small stuff I let slide because I'm a peacekeeper, which is a nice word for coward. Alina and I got married 3 years ago in September, in a little banquet hall in Parma with a cash bar and my uncle's cover band. It was a good wedding. Before it, my mother asked me twice, in a light little voice, whether Alina's paperwork was all the way sorted, which is an interesting question to ask about a woman who has been a United States citizen since she was 19 and had, at that point, been cleaning my mother's teeth for free for 2 years. At the reception, my mother did a toast. It was mostly about me. The one line about my wife was, "And Alina, we're so glad you found Danny." Not that I found her. That she found me. Little thing. I noticed it and let it go. Then it was the food. Alina's mother Mihaela makes sarmal, which is cabbage rolls, and she'd bring a tray to every family thing, because that's how she says she loves you. My mother would take one, cut it in half, eat the half, and say the same thing every single time. It's very interesting. It's a lot for me. Every time. 2 years of that. And when Alina finally said at Easter, "Deb, you don't have to eat it. It's okay," my mother put her hand on her chest and said, "Honey, I'm trying. I'm the only one here even trying." Then it was the accent. My mother started this bit where if Alina said a word with a W in it, my mother would repeat it back, smiling, like it was cute. "Wednesday? Oh, Wednesday. That's adorable." And she'd look around the table for the laugh, and my aunts would give her the laugh. And Alina would smile with her mouth closed and go quiet for the next 20 minutes. I talked to my mom about it once, about a year into the marriage. I did it politely. I said, "Hey, the accent thing bothers her. Could you knock it off?" My mother's eyes filled up so fast it was like she had it loaded. She said, "So I can't say anything at all now. I have to walk on eggshells in my own family." Then she called my sister and cried to her, and Megan called me and said, "Dude, you made Mom cry. Can you just let it go?" And my dad, at the next cookout, put a hand on my shoulder in the driveway and said, "Ah, that's just your mother. She doesn't mean it." So I let it go. That's the pattern. I want you to see the pattern, because everything that happened after this is the same pattern, just bigger. 2 Christmases ago, Megan bought everybody in the family one of those Ancestry spit kits. $99 each. She got them on some Black Friday deal. She was thrilled with herself. My dad did his that night at the kitchen table, spitting into a little tube and complaining the whole time about how long it took to fill the line. Megan did hers. I stuck mine in the junk drawer in our kitchen under the takeout menus and forgot about it for 2 years. My mother wouldn't do hers. She said, "Those things are a scam. They sell your blood to the insurance companies." My dad said it's spit, not blood. She said, "Ray, I'm not doing it," in a voice that ended the conversation, and she got up and started clearing plates that nobody was finished with. Remember the junk drawer. Remember what she said about the scam. Nico came in January. RSV season was brutal that year, so we kept him in. Alina's mom stayed with us for 5 weeks, and honestly those were the best 5 weeks of my life, which is a hard thing to say now because of how they got used against us later. My mother did not take that well. She came over twice in the first month, and both times she stood in the doorway of the nursery with her coat still on and said things like, "Well, I know when I'm not needed," and "It must be nice having your mother be the important one." And when I said, "Ma, you're welcome anytime, you know that," she said, "Am I? Because I've got a key and I've never once felt like I could use it." Yeah, she had a key. I gave it to her when we bought the house. For emergencies, the way you do. She'd used it maybe 4 times in 2 years, always to drop something off. After Nico came, she started using it more. Alina came downstairs one Tuesday morning in a robe, still leaking, 4 days postpartum, and my mother was sitting on our couch holding our son, and she said, "Oh, don't get up on my account, honey." I let myself in. I said something that time. I said, "Hey, Ma, from now on, can you text first?" She said, "Text first, to see my grandson." And then, and this is a direct quote, she said, "I never needed an appointment with Megan's kids. Megan doesn't have kids. Megan has never had kids." My mother says stuff like that, stuff that isn't even true when she's mad, and it works, because you spend the next 30 seconds confused instead of angry. Here's where I need to tell you about Alina's phone, because this is the thing that saved me later. Somewhere around month 4 of our marriage, Alina started keeping a note on her phone. She never told me. It was just a running list, 1 line per entry, date, and what was said. She started it after a Thanksgiving where my mother told her, in front of everyone, "You know, they say the second generation loses the accent," and then patted her hand. 11 months of entries when I finally saw it. 41 lines, dates, quotes, who was in the room. She didn't do it to build a case. She did it because she was starting to think she was crazy. Because every time she told me what happened, I'd say some version of, "She's just like that," or "She doesn't mean it." And my wife started to genuinely wonder if she was inventing things. I made my wife think she was inventing things. That one's on me and I'll carry it. Okay, the sip and see. My mother had been pushing for a party since Nico was 2 weeks old. We kept saying no because of the flu season. She kept saying, "I've had my shot," like that covered the other 40 people. Finally, we agreed on April 12th, when Nico was 3 months, at her house on Fairlawn, because she said her house was bigger and she wanted to do it as a gift. Her exact words were, "Let me do this one thing for you two." She invited 51 people. She made a thing with pastel balloons and a banner that said, "Welcome Nico," and she had a caterer do pulled pork. It was, on paper, an incredibly generous party. Alina almost didn't go. She'd had a bad week, her milk supply was tanking, and she said quietly in the car, "I don't want to be looked at today." I said, "Please, it's my mom's one thing, just an hour and we'll leave." So she went. She wore a blue dress and did her hair, and she was beautiful, and she smiled at everybody, and I watched my mother work that room like a politician, holding my son on her hip and saying, "Look at all that hair. Isn't he something?" About an hour in, I went to get a burp cloth out of the diaper bag which was on the bench by the back door where we'd dropped it. I put my hand in the side pocket where the cloths go and my knuckles hit a cardboard box. I pulled it out. $219, one of the higher-end at-home paternity kits, still sealed in plastic. There were 2 little envelopes visible through the cellophane window, and both of them already had labels filled out. One said alleged father. That one was blank. The other one said child. And in the blank next to it, in blue ballpoint, in that tight, cramped print I have seen on every piece of Tupperware, every Christmas gift tag, every school permission slip of my entire life. It said Nico VI. Stood in my mother's back hallway holding that box and my ears started ringing. And then I looked up, through the doorway into the kitchen, and my mother was standing there with my son on her hip. She had a cotton swab in her right hand. Not a Q-tip out of a bathroom drawer. A long paper-stemmed collection swab, the kind that comes in the sleeve, and she had it maybe 4 inches from Nico's mouth, and she was making a little cooing noise at him and saying, "Open up for Grandma." Open up. I don't remember crossing the kitchen. I remember taking my son off her hip with my left arm and her saying, "Danny, what on earth?" in the voice she uses when other people can hear. And I walked out of that kitchen into a living room full of pastel balloons, holding my son against my chest with one arm and holding that sealed box up by the corner with the other hand, label out, my kid's name in my mother's handwriting facing 50 people, and I said, "Mom, explain the label." You could hear the caterer's tongs hit the pan. Nobody moved. My Aunt Cheryl put down her plate. My dad, sitting in the recliner in the corner, went the color of drywall. Alina stood up off the couch so fast. She knocked over a cup of pop, and she didn't even look at it. She just looked at the box, and I watched my wife understand the entire last year of her life in about 2 seconds. My mother recovered fast. I have to give her that. She smiled, this warm hostess smile, and she said, "Sweetheart, you're making a scene at your son's party." I said it again, "Explain the label." And she said, "And I want you to understand there were 51 people in that room. My father, her sisters, 2 of my cousins, my wife," she said. "Danny, I'm not going to apologize for wanting to protect you. Any mother would want to know." Alina made a sound I've never heard her make before. Then she walked out the front door. I said, "You'll never touch him again." I said it flat, not yelling, and I think that's why it landed. Then I took my son and the diaper bag and that stupid box and I left. Aunt Cheryl said my name in the driveway. I got in the car. Alina was already in the passenger's seat with her hands over her face. We drove 11 minutes without saying a word. Then Alina, still looking out the window, said, "For a year I have been telling you." And I said, "I know," and she said, "No. For a year I have been telling you and you told me I was too sensitive." And I pulled over into a Speedway parking lot because I couldn't see straight, and my wife showed me the note on her phone. All 41 lines. Scrolled it slow so I'd have to read every one. Line 11 from the previous May. Deb asked M if anyone in my family has dark eyes. Asked twice. Line 26 from October when Alina was 6 months pregnant. Deb told Aunt Patty in the kitchen we'll see who he looks like. Thought I was in the bathroom. Line 33. From 3 days after Nico was born. Deb asked what time exactly the induction started. Asked me to do the math out loud. I sat in that parking lot and read my wife's diary of my own mother, and somewhere in there is the exact moment I stopped being hurt and started being something else. It's not a dramatic moment. I just got very calm. I told Alina we were changing the locks that night, and I did it that night, out of my own truck stock, at 10:40, in the dark, with a headlamp on, because I couldn't stand the idea of that woman's key existing while my son slept upstairs. She still had it, of course. She just couldn't use it anymore. She found that out on Tuesday. A lot of you are going to ask why I didn't just go scorched earth in that living room, and honestly, in the 2 days after, I thought I already had. I thought that was the end of it. I want to tell you what actually happens after you do something like that in an Italian, Irish, Polish East Side family where everybody lives within 9 miles of each other. What happens is, you become the problem. The first text came in 90 minutes after we left, from Aunt Patty, my mother's youngest sister. It said, "Danny, that was very hard on your mother. She's been crying since you left. Whatever happened, that was not the place. Not the place. She had the box in my diaper bag, at a party she threw, in a house she picked, and I was the one with a location problem. By Monday, Megan called me. My sister, who I love, who I have driven to the airport at 4 in the morning more times than I can count, said okay. So, obviously Mom was wrong. But you humiliated her in front of everybody. and now she's saying she's not going to be able to show her face at church. I said Meg, she was going to swab my kid, and Megan said, I know, it's insane. But she's like spiraling, and Dad's not doing well with it either. So can you just call her and get it over with? Get it over with. That's the family's whole theology in 4 words. My mother did not call me for 6 days. What she did instead was work the phones. I know this because my cousin Steph, Aunt Cheryl's daughter, is a decent person, and she sent me screenshots on the Wednesday. My mother's version, as told to her sisters, was this. She had concerns, which she'd had for a long time, and she'd prayed about it. She said she never intended to actually use the kit unless she had to, that she just wanted it in case, and that she'd only brought it to the party because it lived in her purse. She said she was in the kitchen cleaning Nico's face, and I'd come in swinging. She said Alina had gotten to me. That's a direct quote from a text to Aunt Patty. She's gotten to him. He's not himself since her. And here is the line that finished me, the one that turned this from a fight into whatever it became. In a message to Cheryl, on the night of the party, at 11:14, my mother wrote, I have said for a year that baby is not Danny's. I am not crazy. Somebody in this family has to be willing to say the thing nobody wants to say. For a year, not since the hospital, not since the hair, since before he was born. She'd been telling her sisters that my wife cheated on me since Alina was in her 2nd trimester. She'd been sitting across from my pregnant wife at Sunday dinners, saying, Wednesday, and handing her a plate and telling her she looked tired, and then going home and telling 2 women in her prayer group that the baby wasn't mine. I read that screenshot standing in my garage at 11 at night, and I had to put my hands on the workbench. And here's the other thing about that screenshot. Cheryl's reply underneath it said this, Deb, stop. You of all people. You of all people. I read that 4 or 5 times. I thought it meant something like, you of all people should know better, you've been through enough, whatever. I typed and deleted a text to Cheryl 3 separate times. Then I put the phone down and I didn't think about it again for 11 days. You of all people. Meanwhile, my father called on day 7. Not my mother. My dad, who has maybe called me 40 times in my life, who communicates through waves from driveways. He said, Danny. Then a long silence, then she shouldn't have done that. I said, I know, Dad, and he said, I'm not defending it. Another silence, and then quiet, like he was afraid somebody was in the next room, which she probably was. He said, how's the boy? I said, he's good. He's got a tooth coming in. And my dad said, that's good. That's good. And then, before he hung up, he said something I didn't understand until later. He said, you take care of him. That's the whole job. Everything else is noise. 2 days after that, Alina said the thing that started the second half of this. We were in bed and she wasn't crying anymore. She was past that. She was in the cold place and she said, Danny, I want you to do the test. I said, absolutely not. I said, I'm not giving that woman 1 inch. I said, if I test him, I'm saying her question was a real question. And Alina sat up and said, not for her, for me. Because in 20 years, when he's a man, I want a piece of paper in a drawer so that if anybody in your family ever opens their mouth about my son, I never have to argue. I just hand them the paper. I want to be honest, because this is the part where I was still being a coward in a new outfit. I said yes, partly because I loved her, and partly because some sick little part of me wanted my mother to be handed a document. I wanted the win, so I bought a kit. Different brand, $330. The kind where a nurse witnesses the collection at a clinic, so the result is legally usable. We drove to a place in Middleburg Heights on a Thursday morning. They swabbed me. They swabbed Nico. He screamed for 4 seconds and then tried to eat the swab. 6 to 8 business days. And on the way home, at a red light on Pearl Road, I remembered the junk drawer. That old $99 Ancestry kit from Megan, still shrink-wrapped under the takeout menus, 2 years expired probably, and I thought, you know what? If we're doing DNA, let's do all of it. Let's build the whole file. My dad's results were already on that site from 2 Christmases ago. Megan had linked everybody's accounts, and there was a stupid, petty, completely human part of me that thought, I'll pull up the family tree with all the Irish and the German on it, and I'll show Alina where Nico's hair actually came from, because I know for a fact my mother's father was Sicilian on his mother's side. That was it. That was my whole reason. A petty little errand for a fight I'd already won. I spit in the tube that night at the kitchen table. Alina laughed at me for how long it took to fill the line, same as my dad 2 years earlier, and it was the first time either of us had laughed in 3 weeks. I have rewritten this next part more times than I want to admit, because there's no way to write it that makes it sound like anything but a soap opera, and I'm telling you it happened to me in a kitchen in Cleveland on a Tuesday. The paternity results came first, on day 9. I opened the PDF standing at the counter with Alina holding my arm. Probability of paternity: 99.9999%. Nico is mine. Obviously Nico is mine. Alina printed it. She printed 2 copies. One went in the fireproof box with the birth certificate and one went in her purse, and she said, "Now I have the paper." And she cried for about a minute and then made a sandwich. That was supposed to be the end. The ancestry results came in 11 days later, on a Thursday night, while I was eating leftovers, standing up. The email said my results were ready. I opened it on my phone, and the first screen you get is the ethnicity breakdown, the little pie chart. And I looked at it for a while, because it didn't say what I expected at all. 41% Polish, 22% Slovak, 14% Eastern European, unspecified, some Baltic. Almost nothing else. My dad's results, which I could pull up right next to mine because Megan linked everything, are 38% Irish, 31% English, and Northwestern European, and the rest German. My mother's family is Polish on her mother's side, and Sicilian on her father's. I sat down. I looked at those 2 pie charts side by side for probably 5 minutes, and I told myself the same things you'd tell yourself. These things are estimates. They update them all the time. It's not exact. Then I clicked the tab that says DNA matches. My father's name was not on the list. Not at the top, not anywhere. I scrolled the whole first page twice looking for it. What was on the list at the top was a woman named Bridget, 34 years old, according to her little profile photo caption, from Strongsville, which is 22 minutes from the house I grew up in. Shared DNA, 25%. The relationship the site suggested, in gray letters under her name, was half-sister, and under her, at 12%, a man's listed as half-nephew, and under him, first cousins I have never heard of, Sadowski, Wozniak, Stadowski. I knew that name. I have known that name my entire life, and I hadn't thought about it in 20 years. Gary Sadowski. Uncle Gary, except he wasn't an uncle, he was a guy from the plant. Big laugh, mustache. Always brought the good pop to the 4th of July, cookout, the kind in glass bottles. He used to come around all the time when I was little. Photos of him at my 4th birthday, my 5th, and then somewhere around when I was 8, he just stopped coming. And if you'd asked me at any point in the last 25 years, I would have said he probably moved, or he and my dad had a falling out over the union, or he died. He did die, actually. 2019. I remember my mother reading it out of the paper at the kitchen table and saying, and turning the page, and my dad going out to the garage for 2 hours. I went down to the basements where the totes are. I found the album from the 80s, the one with the sticky pages and the plastic film, and I found the picture I was thinking of, which is my parents' wedding, October, my mother in the sleeves, my father in the rented tux, and standing on the end of the groomsmen line, holding a beer, is a big guy with a mustache. And I sat on a concrete floor and held that photo next to my own face in my phone camera. And I want you to understand something. I have heard my whole life that I don't look like my dad. My whole life. My mother said it constantly as a joke, as a compliment to herself. "Oh, Danny's all mine. He didn't get one thing from Ray." She said it at graduations. She said it at my wedding. She said it at my wedding. I called Megan. I don't know why Megan first. She was just the number I hit. I said, "Meg, I need you to look at something and not tell anybody." And I sent her the 2 pie charts and the match list, and there was a long silence, and then my sister said, "That's a mistake." That's obviously a mistake. Those things are wrong all the time. And then, quieter, 30 seconds later, Danny, why isn't Dad on there? Mine has Dad on it. Because Megan is his. 12% half-nephew, 25% half-sister, and my little sister sitting at the top of her own list with a father. I didn't sleep. Around 4 in the morning, Alina found me on the couch, and I told her, and my wife, who had been shredded by these people for 3 years, did not say one single satisfied word. She got a blanket and sat with me. That's who she is. At 6:30 in the morning, I called my dad and asked him to meet me at the Dunkin' on Ridge, the one by the tire place, because I could not have this conversation in that woman's kitchen. He was already there when I got there. In the corner booth with a coffee and a napkin he was folding into smaller and smaller squares. I put my phone on the table with the match list up. Bridget, 25%. Half-sister. My dad looked at it for a long time. And then he did the thing that broke me in half, which is that he didn't ask a single question. He didn't say, "What is this?" He didn't say, "Who is Bridget?" He didn't say, "There must be a mix-up." He said, "How'd you find out?" I said, "Dad." And my father, who is 62 years old and worked 31 years in a stamping plant and has never in his life said a hard thing out loud, said, "I've known since you were 2. 31 years. He told me the whole thing in about 6 minutes, in a Dunkin', at 7 in the morning, with a country station playing. There was a bad stretch the year after they got married. He was on nights. Gary was a friend. It ended. My mother was pregnant, and she told him it was his, and he believed her for 2 years. And then one day at a cookout he looked at me on Gary's shoulders, and he knew the way you know. And he asked her, and she screamed at him for 2 hours, and then she admitted it. I said, "Why did you stay?" He said, "Because you were 2. I said, "Dad, that's not a reason." And my dad said, "It was the only one I needed." He turned the coffee cup around. He said, "I made a decision that year that you were mine and that was going to be the end of it, and I have not changed my mind one time since." He said, "I told her I'd stay, and she never spoke his name in my house again, and he stopped coming around, and that was the arrangement." Then he said, "I never wanted you to know, not because of me, because there's nothing in it for you." And then he sat there, and his chin started going, and he said, "But she went after your boy. That's what got him. 31 years of the floor, 31 years of that's just your mother." And what finally broke my father was watching his wife stand in a kitchen with a swab and try to do to my son the exact thing she had done to him. He said, "I sat in that recliner and watched her hold up that box and say any mother would want to know." He laughed, this awful little laugh. He said any mother would want to know. She knew. She's known for 31 years. Then my father said, "I should have said something a long time ago." And I said, "Said what, Dad?" "Say it to who?" And he said, "I should have said something to her. Every time. Every single time she started in on your wife. I should have opened my mouth. And I sat there and looked at the floor, because I've been buying quiet in that house since 1993, and I got so used to paying that I stopped noticing the price." We sat in a Dunkin' parking lot in his truck for another 40 minutes. My dad cried and I didn't, which is strange, and I've thought about why. I think it's because I already knew what I was going to do, and you can't do what I did next while you're crying. Here's what I did, and I'm going to lay it out plainly. Because a lot of people are going to say I was cruel, and maybe I was. But I want you to see that not one thing on this list is a lie I told. First, I did nothing for 9 days. I let my mother keep working the phones. I let her tell Aunt Patty that Alina had turned me against my own family. I let her tell her prayer group that she was grieving a living grandson. She actually sent me one text in that stretch on a Sunday that said, "I hope you're happy. I haven't slept in 2 weeks. All I have ever done is protect this family." I saved that one. Second, I wrote to Bridget. I told her who I was, that I'd just found out, that I wasn't looking for anything and she was free to ignore me. She wrote back in 2 hours. Her dad had passed in 2019. She knew she'd found out in 2021 off the same website and had been sitting on my name for 4 years because she didn't want to blow up a stranger's life. She said, and I'm going to get this right, I have looked at your profile picture probably 100 times. You have his hands. She's a school nurse. She has 2 kids. We've met twice now. I'm not going to write about that part. It's hers too, and it's not entertainment. Third, I went to see a lawyer, which cost me $250 for 45 minutes, and was worth every cent. We sent my mother a certified letter revoking any implied permission to enter our property, notifying her that the locks had been changed on April 12th, and stating that any further contact with our son would go through us in writing. We put her off Nico's daycare pickup list. We took her off the emergency contact card at the pediatrician, which I hadn't even thought about until the lawyer asked. It's not a restraining order, it's just paper. But paper is the only language that family has ever actually respected. Fourth, my father moved out. He did it on a Wednesday while she was at work, with my truck and 2 of my guys from the local, and he took his tools, his chair, his clothes, and the photo albums. He did not take the recliner. He's in a 1-bedroom in Brooklyn Heights, 12 minutes from us, and he watches Nico on Thursdays. And fifth, on the last Sunday in May, we all ended up in the same room one final time, because my mother would not let it be over. She called an air-clearing dinner at Aunt Cheryl's. That's what she named it. She invited everybody, including us, through Megan, because I'd stopped answering her. And Alina, of all people, is the one who said we should go. She said, "If you don't go in 10 years, this is a story about a boy who abandoned his mother. Go and let her talk." So we went. 12 adults around Cheryl's dining room table, the good tablecloth, a ham nobody touched. Nico stayed home with Alina's mother. That was deliberate. My mother had a speech ready. She'd clearly worked on it. She talked for close to 4 minutes about how she may have gone about things the wrong way, but her heart was in the right place, and how a mother's instinct is a real thing that science doesn't understand, and how she had preyed on it, and how she was willing to forgive all of us for how we'd treated her. Forgive us. She said that, and she finished with, "I did what any mother would do. I wanted the truth. Is wanting the truth a crime in this family now?" And I said, "No, Ma, let's have it." And I put 3 pieces of paper on the table. The first one was the paternity result. I slid it down to Aunt Patty and said, "Read the bottom line out loud," and she did in a small voice, 99.99999%. "My son is my son," I said. "That's 100% of what you claim to want. You've had a grandson for 4 months and you have not asked one time how he's doing." The second one was the screenshot from the night of the party, her own message. "I have said for a year that baby is not Danny's." I read it out myself and I watched Aunt Patty's face change because Patty hadn't seen it. Patty had been told a much softer story. And the third one I didn't hand to anybody. I held it and I said, "Third thing. This is my ancestry report. 25% shared with a woman named Bridget Sadowski. I have never in my life heard a room go that quiet." Cheryl put her hand over her mouth. Not surprised, that's the thing. Cheryl was not surprised. And that's when I finally understood her text from the night of the party, the one that said, "You of all people." Cheryl had known since 1993. Her own sister had confided in her 31 years ago and then spent the last year of her life telling that same woman that my wife was a cheater. My mother said, "Where did you get that?" Not, "It's not true," not, "There's a mistake." "Where did you get that?" I said. "From a spit kit. You know, the scam." She stood up so fast her chair went over. She started to say something about how it was a different time and how she was 25 and how nobody knows what that year was like and how Ray forgave her so it was nobody's business. And that's when my father, at the far end of the table, said, "Sit down, Debbie." He didn't yell. In 33 years I have never heard him use that tone. She sat down and my dad said, "You put a swab in my grandson's mouth to find out if he was a bastard." He let that sit. He said, "I have kept your secret since 1993. I kept it at his graduation. I kept it at his wedding when you stood up and told 100 people he didn't get one thing from me." His voice went. He said, "You let me keep that for you. And then you turned around and did it to his wife on purpose, in front of people, for a year, knowing." Then he stood up, and he said the only cruel thing I have ever heard my father say, and God help me. I'd let him say it again, he said. You weren't protecting Danny. You were checking if the world works the way you need it to. It doesn't. And he walked out, and I got up and went with him, and my wife got up and went with both of us. And at the door I turned around and looked at the table. Aunt Patty was crying. Megan was staring at her plate. And Cheryl, who has known the whole time, was sitting there with her hand still over her mouth. And my mother was looking around that table waiting for somebody to look up at her. Nobody did. It's been about 3 months. People have been asking for an update, so here it is. And I'll tell you up front that nothing about it feels like a movie. My mother has not seen Nico since April 12th. She sent 17 texts in the first month, and I read all of them and answered none. They went in the order you'd expect. Anger, then bargaining, then this long stretch of things about her health, then a genuinely nasty one at 2 a.m. that said, "You have your father's family now. I hope they're worth it." Then, finally, 4 weeks ago, one that just said, "I'd like to see him." No apology. Not one in 3 months, not to me and not to Alina. In her version, she is a woman whose family turned on her over a mistake she made when she was 25, and a package she never even opened. My dad filed. He's not doing it out of revenge, he was very clear about that with me. He said, "I stayed to raise a kid. The kid's 33. He's got the apartment. He's got a fantasy football league, and on Thursdays he comes over and sits on our living room floor and lets my son pull his ear until he falls asleep on his chest." Last month, Nico grabbed his glasses and my dad said, "Watch it, buddy. Those are $200. And Alina laughed so hard she had to leave the room, and I stood in the kitchen doorway and had a moment about it. Because here's the thing that took me a while to land on. That man is my father. Not he raised me so he counts. He is the actual thing. There is a version of this where a guy finds out at 33 that his dad isn't his dad and he loses his father. I found out my father chose me on purpose. Once, in a backyard in about 1995, when nobody was watching and nobody would ever have known if he'd walked. He's the only person in this entire story who did something hard for somebody else's sake and then never mentioned it for 31 years. Cheryl and I are done. She called twice. The second time she said, "I never lied to you," and I said, "You sat in my mother's kitchen and let her say my wife cheated, and you knew what she was," and Cheryl said, "It wasn't my place." That's the whole family in one sentence. It's never anybody's place. Aunt Patty, weirdly, has become an ally. She sent Alina a long, clumsy, handwritten card that started with, "I have not been a good aunt to you," and got worse from there in the best way. Alina cried and put it in her purse and carried it around for a week. Patty comes over now. She brings a cake nobody needs. She calls Nico the mayor. Megan is somewhere in the middle and I'm making my peace with that. She still sees Mom. She says somebody has to. She apologized to me, actually apologized, for the just call her and get it over with thing. And she's the one who told me our mother has started telling people at church that Alina arranged the DNA results, which is not a thing a person can do, but is a very good indicator of where all this started. And Alina hung the paternity result in a cheap black frame in Nico's closet on the inside of the door where nobody sees it but us. I asked her why, and she said, "Because for a year I let that woman make me feel like I had something to be ashamed of, and I want to see the number every time I get his pajamas." She also, and I love her for this, mailed my mother the $219 kit back unopened. No note. Last week, Nico did the thing where he grabs your face with both hands. He's got 7 teeth now, and that hair still stands straight up. And it turns out it came from a guy with a mustache who used to bring the good pop to cookouts. And I've made my peace with that, mostly. Bridget sent me a photo of her dad at 30, and I put it in a drawer, and I look at it about once a week, and I don't know what I feel yet. Some things you just carry around for a while. But here's what I keep circling back to at 2 a.m. My mother spent an entire year telling her sisters my wife was a liar. She sat across from a pregnant woman and studied her face for evidence. She threw a party for my son so she could get a swab in his mouth. And she did all of it while sitting on the exact same secret for 31 years, in her own marriage, in her own house. She wasn't protecting me. My dad was right. She was checking to see if the universe was fair. And when it turned out my son was mine and hers wasn't my father's, she still couldn't say a single honest word. So I'm asking, because I've had my sister, my aunt, and 2 guys at work all tell me. I went too far by putting that report on Cheryl's dining room table in front of the whole family instead of telling my mother privately. My father says I did the only thing that would have ever stopped her. My wife says I should have done it a year earlier. Was I wrong for exposing a 31-year-old secret at that dinner instead of behind a closed door? And is there any version of this where I ever let that woman near my son again?